Welcome to the Spiritual Deep Dive in 5 podcast. So glad you could join us to spend some time reflecting on God and His love for each of us today. Make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, ring that bell. That way you'll never miss out on any of our content. The Spiritual Deep Dive podcast is posted Monday through Friday by Christ Church of Flagstaff here in Flagstaff, Arizona. And you can find more information about our church online at ccof.church. Thank you so much for watching, and we are so excited to see what God is going to do in your life because you are committed to spending time with Him. It's Good Friday. Jesus says from the cross several things that we've been talking about, and the last two we're going to talk about tonight here at CCOF in our Good Friday service. So if you're hearing this on Friday, April 2nd, please join us, 6:30. I will remind you in a moment. Jesus said, I thirst. It's an interesting thing because when we look at Psalm, we look at other parts of what has happened with God's people, what we call our Old Testament Bible and section, we see these stories and sayings and poems and all kinds of things. And Psalm 69, verse 21 is considered a messianic prophecy, a picture of what Messiah would say and do. And in that psalm, it's recorded these words: they gave me vinegar for my thirst. It's an interesting thing just to say, I thirst, and to use that word. And then I want to point to you to Exodus chapter 12. See, in Exodus 12 is the instructions for the original Passover, which is about to take place in just a few moments from when Jesus said, I thirst. And in Exodus 12, verse 22, it tells the Israelites to take a bunch, this is what it says, take a bunch of hyssop, which is a branch, a plant that grew in the region, still does, dip it in the blood. So there has been a Passover lamb sacrificed, and the blood has been taken or kept. It says, dip into the blood the hyssop branch and put some of the blood on the top and both sides of your door frame. Very specific instructions on Passover. Do exactly these things with exactly these materials. And what happened that night is that when evil came, the angel of death came to take a firstborn son from every family in the area. Those who had followed these instructions were passed over. The angel of death passed over the houses where the blood, brushed by hyssop branches, were on door frames. And in the other homes, and mostly the Egyptian homes, the firstborn child, the male child, was taken. It's so amazing to see these connections. So now listen to what is happening in John 19 when Jesus says, I thirst. It's so connected to what we find in the original Passover, because this is the ultimate Passover, right? You have to understand these connections. Verse 28, later knowing that everything had now been finished, and so that scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, I am thirsty. A jar of wine vinegar, remember Psalm 69, was there. So they soaked a sponge in it, put the sponge on the stalk of a hyssop plant, lifted it to Jesus's lips. Then he says some of his last words that we will discuss tonight when we gather. But when Jesus thirsted at the very end, the delivery of quenching his thirst wasn't actually anything thirst quenching at all. It was vinegar, but it was delivered on a hyssop branch, the part of the plant used later that day to still wipe blood in memory of the Passover that had happened many, many years earlier. And tonight when we gather as a church family, or you gather with your family, or just even you're connecting to a church family or some group of believers digitally, communion will be part of what we do. And we do it in the very similar fashion to remember what happened, to remember this death, that the one who hung on that cross, who said he was thirsty, was the one whose blood allows death to pass over us. What do you do? Where do you go to quench your thirst? What if we could see communion, the Lord's Supper, the Holy Eucharist, we call it in some places? What if communion is the ultimate thirst quencher? Maybe you could join us tonight online with some communion elements, or in the room, 6:30, Christchurch Flagstaff. Where do you and I go to quench our thirst?